All right, so the approach that we're going to be doing on this black paper, and this is the whole reason I had you get the black paper and the white pencil, is we are going to be dealing with light shapes. We're still very much concerned with that border between light and shadow. I've picked this image to show us because it's quite obvious, it's blatantly obvious where the light shapes are. Though there are some areas where we're getting some bounce light, and I'll point those out. Mainly this is to just show us how little information we really need to still have things feel correct, feel convincing. If I reduce this figure, so I'm going to walk through and reduce this. This is obviously a photo, but if I reduce it down to just the light shapes, so we'll kill all that. That's about what we get. It's a weird stack of light shapes, and yet it still reads like a hand. Our brain can still make sense of that being a hand, particularly if we're careful about those shapes, how big they are, where they are in relation to the other shapes, and so on. We're going to start this drawing just picking the biggest, simplest shape we can start with, drawing that shape, filling it lightly in with white charcoal with a sharp pencil. You really need to make sure your pencils are sharp for this. If you have a dull pencil, it's going to look like a crayon, or it's going to be pretty aggressive. It can be pretty aggressive looking, or kind of hasty is probably a better word for it. So make sure you've got a sharp pencil to do this approach in. I'll start here, probably that shoulder, and just draw the shape in as carefully as possible, and then fill it in with one light pass. And when I say light pass, I mean it's a light hand. You're not going in and just really drawing those edges in firmly. You're keeping it quite light. So what that would look like on your paper, a light-handed drawing, it's dim. You still have room to work. You really don't want to spend all of your value range in one go. That means you lay the light down so light, so heavy-handed, that there's nowhere to go. You've maxed out how light and value your pencil can go. It's similar to the shadow shapes that we did, where you draw the shape in and you fill it in with one pass of value. You don't try to go darker or lighter in the shadow shapes. This stage is going to be like that. You draw the shapes in, you just fill them in lightly, and you leave it at that. However, in this drawing, once you get plenty of those shapes together, like we see here, we're going to come back into these shapes. And this is different than the shadow shapes drawing that we did. We're going to come back into this drawing and start deciding within these shapes, within these light shapes, where is it lighter? Where is it slightly less light? Is there a soft edge, a blurry edge, or is there a hard, sharp edge that goes from really light to really dark quite quickly? So this is what that will look like. I'm going to pick on this hand so we can see it. Right now, if I look at the overall image, it reads like I can tell that's a person. I can tell what's going on here, but it's still quite flat. As soon as I start this process of going lighter in some spots, less light in other spots, things start to jump out. So for instance, that's an area that seems lighter, like along the top of this shape. That's like one step. And then I could go a little bit further and be like, you know what, these seem like a little bit lighter areas as well. So they get slightly more of that white charcoal. And I'll kind of leave it there, but if you look at the difference now, you can see that hand is starting to pop really hard. It's starting to take on a lot of dimension. And it's just because I'm being careful with those light shapes. And this is a lazy Photoshop version of it. Imagine if I was being extra careful with a pencil here, or indeed if I was being extra careful in Photoshop, how much more convincing this could be. But even as it is, that thing is starting to pop off the page really nicely. And the rest of the drawing is going to follow suit. Just a few things to look at. So here's that image again. Right down here in this arm, you'll see it's kind of light. And especially this rim down here is kind of light. And you might be tempted to go, especially right there, I'll look at that little light. You might be tempted to go, oh, okay, white charcoal, and lay that in white charcoal. And I'm here to tell you right now, do not do that. Don't put any white charcoal whatsoever in anything that reads as a shadow. So I can look at this and know, okay, light is hitting, light is hitting, light is hitting. And it's blown out because I've raised the contrast. But right here, that's the edge of a shadow shape. And this is all in shadow, and the reason that it's lighting up a little bit is because this leg is bouncing light back into that shadow. It can just be ignored. You can safely ignore that. And I would for this drawing. So don't draw anything in this drawing that is supposed to be in shadows. We are just drawing the shapes of the light. You can almost imagine that it's like the light source is a shower. Anywhere the water is actually hitting the person, anywhere the photons from the light source are actually hitting the surface, that's a light shape, you draw it in. Anywhere the light is bouncing back in, you don't draw it. Okay, so that covers it for the light shapes. That's what we're going to be doing in this drawing. Just to recap, we are not going to gesture. We're just going to trust our hand and our eye to do the work. We are going to measure. We are only drawing the light shapes. If it does not belong in the light, do not draw it. We're going to draw lightly with a sharp pencil. And when I say draw lightly, I mean don't press hard. Be gentle about it. Things to remember about light shapes down here. What size is the shape you're drawing? Since there's no gesture, you're going to have to pick a shape that's reasonably sized. This should feel like shadow shapes and negative shapes kind of combined and a little bit more complicated. What size is the shape? If it's a shoulder, does it make sense to put that shape at the bottom of the page? Probably not. Does it make better sense to put that shape up and sort of off-centered in the page? Probably. In these drawings, if your figure runs off the page a little bit or if the size gets kind of weird, I'm not going to worry too much about that because I'm not letting you gesture. We're just jumping straight into the shapes. I will say, however, if you're very careful, you can still get the figure to show up on the page at the right size and looking proportional if you're very careful about measuring the sizes of the shapes that you're drawing. Other concerns of light shapes, the angles and proportion. And in parentheses, that says internal, external. Internal angles and proportion. If I'm dealing with a shape, the internal considerations of that shape are things like what angle is that edge of the shape slanted at? Or how wide is this shape compared to how tall it is? Is it taller than it is wide? Is it wider than it is tall? That sort of thing. Those are internal considerations. External considerations, if I measure from this shape to that shape over there, what's the angle between those two shapes? How many of these shapes that I just drew will fit in the space before I get to that other shape, right? You're comparing the shape that you did to the things that are around it rather than comparing it to itself. You need to do both. All right, we're also going to be concerned about edges. Is it a soft edge? And a soft edge is just kind of a blurry edge. It's that edge of something turning into the shadow. Or is it a hard edge? Hard edges are things like the silhouette, maybe the shoulder against the background. That's a sharp edge. It's not very blurry. And then we're going to be worried about value relationships. Whenever I say value, you know I mean how light or dark something is. Also, we're going to think internal and external with that. So internal value relationships will be like, in this weird shape I just drew, where is it lighter and where is it less light? How does the light drop off, if it does at all? And then external value relationships are like, how light is this shape relative to that one over there? And just a shortcut for you or something to remember is the closer the shape is to the light source, chances are the lighter that shape is going to be overall. Did I mention sharp pencils? Make sure you've got a sharp pencil. You've got all the time in the world now. Sharpen them pencils, folks.